All right. Welcome, everyone, to our first panel series in a series that we're calling Career Sustainability Beyond the Film Set. I'm Tavri Crouch. I'm the independent film coordinator for the Chicago Film Office. Thank you to our programming partners here, Peter Hawley, director of the Illinois Film Office, and Bree Castellini of Seed and Spark. Bree is the film community manager for Seed and Spark, and Bree will also be sitting on today's panel. So with their input, their support, and collaboration, we've been able to create this space to have these types of conversations. Conversations that shift from the craft of filmmaking to career making. So these are areas that aren't usually exclusive, because we believe that that you can't have one without the other, that you can't have the making of films without the thought process, the planning, and the thinking about your career making as well. So I'm going to hand over the mic, the stage, the floor to Peter and Bree to say a few words.
Thank you, Tavri, and thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our great panel and the Chicago Film Office and Seed and Spark. I'm very excited about this because, as Tavri was just mentioning, we need to focus on the community here, and you can't really have a community in the arts and a film community without really thinking about careers, and not just a project kind of livelihood, but a full career, a 30, 40-year career. And I don't think Chicago and Illinois will really have the great film community we deserve until we start having careers here. So today and the subsequent panels about career sustainability, I think is going to really put some focus on this very important thing, because we need to have careers here. So thank you all for joining us, and Bree, thank you for bringing us all together.
Yeah, thank you for having us. So for anyone out there who isn't as familiar with Seed and Spark, we like to say that we connect people through stories that matter, and we do that primarily through education, crowdfunding, and creative distribution approaches. So you can head to seedandspark.com if you are curious about any of those things, and you can get in touch with me personally if you have questions about crowdfunding, specifically for film and creative works, because that is my specialty as the film community manager. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk about all the different ways that you can stay creative in your career and actually pay your rent without selling your soul, but still being able to pursue your creative endeavors. And thanks again to all of the various film offices, Chicago, Illinois, for bringing us together today.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Bree. I'm sure plenty of you will be tuning in from outside of Chicago and Illinois. So welcome, non-Illinoisans or non-Chicagoans. We're happy to have you. And this is a conversation for everyone, not just filmmakers, but particularly filmmakers and media makers, but anyone that's thinking about making a career change, or really sort of assessing what it means to create a career that has more meaning for you personally. So next, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Naima Jamila Torres. So Naima is an award-winning Chicago area filmmaker. She's originally from New York City, and she aims to tell stories that unpack notions of womanhood, complex ethnic identities, and legacies in the Americas through producing, directing, and writing. So after receiving a BFA in Film and Media Communication Arts at CUNY City College, she pursued a career in home entertainment distribution, working for companies such as HBO, Warner Media. But her interest in nonfiction storytelling eventually led her to impact producing for critically acclaimed documentaries, including Kartemquin's Unapologetic, and eventually obtaining an MFA in documentary media from Northwestern University, where her thesis film, Redacted, about the legacy of a Louisiana slave revolt, went on to receive several awards and recognitions. I'm actually going to include more of Naima's bio in the chat. Certainly read up on it. Naima, we're so grateful to have her lead this important conversation, and so here we are. I'm going to hand it over to Naima to continue the conversation. So thank you all again for joining us, and I will be hopping off along with Peter.
Hi, thank you for having me. Let's bring on our panelists. Great, nice to see you all. So we have Elena, Zaina, Akib, and Bree. And it's really great to see you, and thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited to have this conversation about what it means to be creators in the Midwest and specifically in Illinois. So first, I'd like to start off with you all introducing yourself to everyone. Let's start with Elena. If you could just tell us all who you are and briefly talk about what you do as a creative entrepreneur.
Yes, quick and dry. I am a self-proclaimed workplace filmmaker. So I live, eat, sleep, and breathe the stories of the workplace. And I do that with my company, Skill Scout. And we really exist to capture the humanity of work because everyone has a story of work and why it's meaningful. And so it's our role as documentarians to capture that. And so that's what we do for the main gig. You know, we've worked with companies large and small, built this business on the shoulders of small to mid-sized manufacturers here in the Midwest. But I've really had the honor of working with companies like Nike, McDonald's, Wendy's, American Airlines. So that's kind of the main thing. And then certainly I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but I'm also the co-founder of a nonprofit here started in Chicago called Mezcla Media Collective, which aims to elevate femme-identifying filmmakers of color in Chicago and beyond.
Thank you. Zaina, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Zaina. I like to tell people I make commercials by day and movies by night. My day job is a content producer in the advertising world. So usually social content, anything from live action, animation, radio. And outside of that, I'm an independent filmmaker, passionate about merging arts and activism through films. I produced 15 films and directed 8 of those films. So that's who I am and that's what I do.
Thank you for sharing. And Akib?
Sure. Hi, my name is Akib. I'm the founder of Midwest Immersive. Midwest Immersive is a cutting-edge experience company. So we work with a host of different creative technologies, including virtual reality, augmented reality, projection mapping, and pretty much any new creative technology we can get our hands on. And then we build those experiences for a lot of big brands. So our clients include Nike, Verizon, most recently Vans and Anderson .Paak, Invisalign, Cadbury, like a lot of big brands end up working with us for that reason. I guess I could say that what drives me is this interest in technology and creativity and my background in film, which I'm excited to share more and more about today. So yeah, thanks for having me on this panel.
Thank you. And Bree, do you want to kind of talk a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so I work at Seed & Spark as their film community manager, which doesn't really mean anything as a title because it's made up because I work for startups and that's just kind of what you do. You make up titles that sound nice. So practically what I do is I give crowdfunding feedback to all of the projects that crowdfund on Seed & Spark, going through their pages section by section to make sure that they're set up for success for whatever they're trying to make. And I also teach workshops and develop new workshops to help people get on their feet a little better, give them the tools they need to make work. And I am also an adjunct professor and freelance instructor for a bunch of other places. So I'm an adjunct at 2 graduate programs here in New York, where I'm based right now, and a low residency one out of LA. And I'm also currently teaching a class with the Women in Comedy community, Hoo Ha Ha. So I'm all over the place, but mostly doing education, consulting, and public speaking, things like that.
Yeah, so we have such a variety of backgrounds here and all kind of stemming from like film adjacent things or careers. And I think the first question I'd like to ask you all is, what are the skills that you have, specific skills that helped you create and sustain your current careers, whether that's technical, creative, or anything related to business? I'll let you take it away, Akib.
I'm thinking about this question and I have answers that are more soft skills as well as hard skills. I think I went to school for film. And while I was at film school, all these skills like editing, producing, directing, I think just kind of getting people together and rallying them up all around a singular mission were some key hard skills that I learned while I was at school, right? But then there's the other soft skills that were also super important, like just awareness of like what is really, really interesting to you and what's driving you. Like when you're looking at any piece of creative material or any creative project, what is it about that project that's really making you tick? I think it's a little bit different for everybody, depending on what their background is, what their interests are. So there's that. And then there's this observation piece of it, which is like, okay, so now you're aware of what you're interested in and what's driving you and what piece of this project is making you interested in it. But how is it saleable? Like, how is it being used out in the world? And how is that skill important to other people? So I think combining those two things was key, because you have to know what's interesting to you and what's out there in the world for you to do and where you can apply those skills that interest you. Because innately, like even when we were trying to hire anybody for Midwest Immersive, we're not really looking at what they've come into with the degree or what resume or anything like that. We're really asking these questions. We're trying to figure out what's driving this person and what is their skill that they could do when they're asleep with their eyes shut and they could still do that job. Like that's what we look for. So I guess those are the skills that I feel like apply to me as well.
No, that's all very useful and excellent. Zaina, what about some of the skills that you have picked up to sustain your career?
I think for me, I never imagined myself as a producer, and we'll get into our like backgrounds and how we got into this later. But for me, it's I think my passion and my interest is much more left-brained than right-brained in creative. I'm very passionate about producing, meaning overseeing the entire production process from script to screen. I like paperwork, budgets, schedules. I like being the go-to person throughout the entire production. And producers are usually the ones that they touch every single part of the process all the way until it gets out into the world, and then even after that. So you're with the project throughout the lifespan of the project. And I think that a huge skill set for being able to navigate a production is being able to make sure your team is moving in the same direction simultaneously at all times, and working and it's really not even juggling. It's more like plate spinning, because you can never really drop the ball. And I think that I enjoy being a part of the entire process, and my skill sets in being very organized and being very timely and enjoying the logistics is what led me into production. So I think those skill sets are just things that I naturally have. I'm a Virgo, so I'm very like detail oriented, and that's just me. And it's just something that I enjoy. So I definitely think time management, organizational skills, and again, like just being the liaison for your team, like those are things that I like doing.
When I hear those words like being a liaison and having those skills of like being there for your team, I think about Elena, who, I think you can share some of those experiences and some of those skills you picked up being the person in charge of Skill Scout. So if you'd like to share any of those skills that you also picked up, please share with us.
Yeah, more specifically, you need to learn how to sell. And I think that's one thing in art school. We really learn how to be great technicians and great artists. But I don't think we really learn how to have meaningful, authentic sales conversations, and how just important that is, not just in pitching your film, but actually getting people to buy from you. That is not something that we learn. And that is something that very much had to be taught, and I had to be mentored in and supported in. And I'm even talking down to the email communication. Email communication and templates to me are key. And anyone who works at Skill Scout knows that I have email templates for everything that are meant to both feel that they're coming from you, that they're empathetic, but it's also kind of setting the tone for how we're going to work together. And it's been key and so important. And I wish it is something that in our creative schools, that is something that we need to start learning, because majority of us end up becoming entrepreneurs and freelancers, and we don't think about that. That's why we're having this panel, because we're trained to learn to become the Hollywood producers and become full-time. And the majority of us end up becoming our own business, and we don't have enough of those skills.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And Bree, I think that this is a perfect timing to get some of, the skills that you've picked up in speaking about, coming from Seed and Spark and educating communities about, the creative process and creative filmmaking. Please share any of those skills as well you think that that you've picked up and think that would be useful for others.
Totally. Yeah, no, Elena, I'm absolutely right there with you, especially now that I'm working at film programs. It's so crazy to me how so much time is spent on craft, but then like they graduate and what are they supposed to do with all this craft? It's not like being talented, unfortunately, is enough these days. So many people are talented. So how do you actually break out of the void of making great work that no one sees is so much to do with learning how to sell yourself in marketing and audience building. So that's a thing that we definitely talk about a lot, and certainly something that I have learned a lot about through doing and failing a lot over the past handful of years being an independent filmmaker myself. But I will say, I think that the skill that got me the furthest in both my filmmaking and writing career, as well as like my professional startup teaching career, is speech and debate. I was a competitive speech and debater for 6 years, 2 in high school, 4 in college. And it not only taught me how to, answer questions that were kind of combative very quickly, but without still thinking about it, not thoughtlessly answering things, but actually having like a construct of how to respond to unexpected questions and frustrations from people. But also by the time that I was a senior, having done 6 years, having to like lead the team, that taught me a lot about how to deal with like a lot of different personalities who are all very ambitious and get them all to sort of hone in on an individual goal. And I think that more than anything else has made my writing stronger. It's made my leadership skills as like a director and showrunner stronger. And it's certainly helpful to be in front of a class full of students who all have completely different ideas of themselves and what they want to do when they graduate, and make sure that they all individually and collectively get the information they need to succeed in whatever their careers end up looking like.
Absolutely. And, you all touched on very briefly your backgrounds. And I think I'd like for this next question to kind of go into that a little more. The overall question I have is, how did you come to this career path? And I know that we all have different twists and turns on how we come across things. But if you could briefly share how you came to the career you're on and what your plans on even for where you're going. I'd like to start with Zaina for that question.
Taking myself off mute. I just never imagined myself to be in production, to be in film. I was homeschooled until I went to college, and I started college when I was 14 years old. And so at that age, I was a kid and I liked animals. So I started off in zoology, and that quickly changed. I was like, oh, nope, that's not for me. So I literally went through like 6 different majors. I landed on acting. And my parents were like, we are not going to pay for that. So I majored in marketing. I minored in acting. And my senior year, I interned for a talent agency. And that's what opened my eyes to the fact that there's an entire industry behind the camera. I was so focused on in front of the camera and the actors, the models. And I thought that's where I wanted to be. But I'm like, no, there's writers, directors, producers, editors, gaffers, cinematographers. I want to be on the other side. So that's what prompted me to get my master's degree in cinema production from DePaul University. And what's interesting about the program was that in film school, you're taught to write these multi-million-dollar scripts and go out to Hollywood and pitch. And I'm like, well, if I'm a producer and my classmates are an entire crew and we've got all this gear at school, why are we not making films? Why are we talking about making films? So I was one who graduated from school with a portfolio of films, a reel, and an agency in Chicago, an executive producer at a ad agency in Chicago saw my reel and asked me to come in. And that's when I wound up as an agency producer. And I've just been here ever since. So when people are like, how did you get into commercial production? I'm like, I literally just fell into it. I almost deleted the email when I first got it because I thought it was spam. Like, oh, we saw your reel and we want you to come in. I'm like, this isn't real. And as far as filmmaking goes, again, like I just realized that there's an industry, there's an entire industry that makes movies, films, TVs happen. And I really wanted to be a part of that. So that's how it happened.
And we're so happy that you decided to do that, Zaina, for all the great work you're doing. I think the next person we can go to is Akib. Like, you have a very different approach in which you took your filmmaking career, and I would love to hear you talk about that as well.
Sure. I think that my entire career has been built on scratching an itch and then backing myself into a corner that I have to fulfill that. So just kind of giving myself no other choice or no other plan B, but just saying like, that's something that I want to do, and I'm just going to continue to go down that path until I get there, to a point where there's like, my plan B is just to fallen off and I can't figure out anything else but what I'm doing. So I started off in film school, graduated, and then I wanted to work in startups. So I was like, this is kind of an interesting thing. If you guys are familiar with 1871 and the Merchandise Mart, that was the first startup incubator hub that I'd ever walked into and worked in. So I ended up going there to shoot a video for a friend of mine who had a startup. And that life just fascinated me, this idea of being really entrepreneurial and like trying to come up with an idea and then figure out how to take it to market at scale was really, really interesting to me. So I was like, that's kind of interesting. I ended up working for that friend of mine for the next 4 years as an interactive producer. We were building the early Facebook Live, Instagram Live versions. We got disrupted in that part of the model. But that kind of gave me a very, very good understanding of how startups work. Like, how do you build a team? How do you raise funding? How do you bring people together around a common mission? How do you advertise your business? How do you market it? So I think like working in a startup just really gave me a lot of these like core skills that normally, like when you work for a big corporation or a big company, you're taught how to be a big, like a part of a big machine and help that machine move forward. But working in a smaller organization or a startup just gives you a holistic understanding of all of those different skills. So you know what you need, and you also start to realize like what you're good at and what you're bad at, more importantly, so you can hire out for those roles. And then with Midwest Immersive, I started Midwest Immersive because I had put on a virtual reality headset for the first time because someone bought it, and I can't even remember who, I wish I did. But I put on this virtual reality headset and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I went back home and I was thinking about it, and I was like, this is a really good combination of a lot of different skills that I have. So I understand how video and filmmaking works. I'm really interested in like the 360 aspect of it. It's kind of this like cutting edge thing that it's still in the same realm, but kind of different, but I could figure it out. And then it had a little bit of game design and implementation and stuff like that, which I was like, I can figure this out too. So I just found it to be the perfect marriage of a lot of different skills that I had. And so I started Midwest Immersive as the Midwest Immersive Tech Meetup. And I wanted to get people together as a community. And, you know, secretly my hope was I would find another job in the immersive tech space. And I started to bring in a lot of different like speakers from around the country to come and speak at my events and talk about their projects to the Chicago community. So the event started off with approximately 20 people, then it went to 200 people by the sixth one. So there's a lot of people that were attending. There's a lot of interest. And they were all asking me if I knew of any companies and people that could execute on these projects that their agency was interested in doing. So I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I could do that. I could do that. So they're like, all right, let's do it. And because of this meetup that I'd started, I'd built up some credibility through community. And I was being invited to these people's offices and different agencies to just kind of present a core capability. And at that time, it was so nascent, like the entire industry was brand new, that even if I showed them what I would look back and say, this is terrible, at that time it was hot. Like, oh, that's cool. Like, thanks for putting us inside of a headset. So I was able to use that momentum to my advantage. And one thing led to another. And I feel like, you know, 4 years in, we've worked on a lot of great projects with a lot of great agencies and a lot of different companies. And I'm pretty happy with what we've been able to accomplish. I mean, shout out to my team as well, who I wouldn't have been able to do it without. But all things combined, you know, luck has been on our side for sure.
I love this way you shared about, starting off in film and then going into something that's more film adjacent, I guess. And I would love to, we're going to talk more about that in another question, but I think we'll go to Elena, if you want to talk about how you, started down this path and where you are now and where you hope to go in the future for your career.
Yeah, this was never meant to be. And I'm very much an accidental entrepreneur. I was a labor organizer coming out of college, helping to organize the second largest hospital system in Chicago at the time. And then I got burnt out, like many labor organizers do. And I realized if I'm going to work 10 hours a day and every other weekend, I needed to go back into the creative arts. And so that's where, and Peter Hawley comes into this. I was a second graduating class of Tribeca Flashpoint at the time for recording arts. So initially I was supposed to be a sound designer and that was gonna be the goal. And then probably 2 months about to graduate, I realized that's not what I wanted to do. And I happened to fall upon the world of human-centered design. And so I ended up working for a company that was very much like an IDEO-like environment, design thinking, and really built my career there as a design researcher, which I think we can talk through as we talk about applicable skills and how this all comes to be. And part of what I did was ended up turning really ugly research video into documentary-like films that could move C-suite, because who would have thought, they don't just pay attention to data, they pay attention to story. And so that's a lot of where it came from. And quite frankly, I was completely self-taught. I was there initially on an internship and a fellowship, and I didn't want to lose it. And I learned everything. When they told me like, oh, we need to do this video, I was like, all right, let me go on lynda.com really quick and figure out how to color correct. I mean, that's literally what it was. I didn't want to lose that job. I loved so much what it was that I taught myself everything that I needed to know about film that I could, and see how it translated to everything that I knew from sound, just to keep that job. And then my life was markedly changed on a project there, which was aimed to connect young people to meaningful pathways to employment. And these were young people that didn't look good on resumes, had never left their neighborhoods, and they lacked access and exposure to jobs. And you cannot be what you cannot see. And so my life was markedly changed on the shores of the Baltimore Harbor with a carpentry training program, and realized that these were super young, talented people that were being shut out from the hiring process. And so when I took a step back, we realized that there was a power in video and there's power in storytelling, initially just to get young people excited about the world of work. So that's what we did. We just started to film jobs, and young people started to put their phones down and start to ask questions about what these jobs could be like. And then we knew that, that this was something that we needed to change around the hiring process, around how we got exposed to work. And so then fast forward several years later, I mean, that's kind of really where we've become, but initially it really started out just like that. I mean, I think it's why also sometimes I get this imposter syndrome, as I'm sure many of us do, but really for myself, because the truth is like, I am not a fancy filmmaker. Like, we were just trying to help kids learn about what it was like to be a cashier. And so, and so obviously I think we've grown from that, but that was really what it was, that this was truly a tool to support people getting into work. We become something very different. But the reason why we still do what we do still has very kind of similar and emotional meaning to it.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm again hearing all these stories about the twists and turns of how we got to where we are, and then also juggling all these different jobs in the film and film adjacent. And I think Bree, if you want to talk to more of the work that you've done and the path that it's taken you throughout your career.
Yeah, actually, I think I have a lot in common in terms of my path with Xana, where I was in graduate school and I was getting my MFA in writing and producing for television, but we were mostly focused on writing. However, second semester of the first year, we had to write and produce a web series pilot. And as I do, I decided to write and produce a whole season over the course of that year. Not that semester, I waited until summer to actually produce it. And as a result of never ever shutting up about this found footage zombie web series that I'd made, I got an internship at MTV in the research department. And while never ever shutting up while at my internship and starting to work on a second season of the web series that I loved so much, but has so many problems with it because it was the first time I'd ever done anything film related. I was a prose writer a year before that. I got the opportunity to join the MTV associate producer in digital development team. So I did a little bit of producing for like their MTV News team and like their digital channels. Snapchat at the time was really, really big, and YouTube and Facebook Live and things like that. And then I transitioned from that into media startups. So first I met the web series company called Starable. They're an audience building website for web series creators. And I met them because I was a web series creator and I just like started attending their happy hours in New York, hit it off with the CEO and started writing guest blogs for their blog. And finally he was like, it seems like you're doing like part-time work for me and maybe you should work here. And I thought, yes, maybe I should work here. So I got hired by Starable and then worked there for a wonderful couple of years. We developed a film festival and a podcast and all this cool stuff for the web series community. And then I joined Seed and Spark because I was looking to sort of expand the types of content creators that I was working with. I loved my web series friends, but then a lot of them were moving on to like short films or features. And the company that I was actively working for wasn't able to support them because that wasn't the niche. So I was looking to kind of expand, and I had crowdfunded on Seed and Spark a handful of times. I was really good friends with Christina Rea, who was their former head of education. And she was like, we're actually probably hiring soon if you want me to put your name in the bucket. And I did, and the rest is history. So basically everything in my career so far, in addition to the teaching gigs, I now teach the web series class I developed mine in, can be brought back to this stupid zombie found footage web series I made back in 2015.
I would love to see that at some point because I'm into zombies, but we will talk about that later. I think we actually have a question from, an audience member, which I think is actually pretty relevant in talking about careers. So Danny Thomas asks, I feel like career sustainability requires a fine-tuned skill to pivot quickly. Can any of you share your most memorable experience of failing up?
Which part of the career? It happens all the time. The first startup we had, which was a precursor to Skill Scout, failed before it even took off. And we had to start from scratch right from there and still have the faith that we could do it. It also, I remember, the reason why we have the focus that we did was because we had no money in the bank. And my colleague just had her second kid. She's a breadwinner of her family. And it still gets me emotional. We had to figure out how we'd make payroll. And so that's when we knew we had to figure out what could we do now that could get us paid. And it wasn't going to be our technology platform. It was going to be the fact that I knew video. So it happens all the time. And I would expect major failing ups to happen, a major milestone at least every 6 months, every year.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons it's hard to answer that question is because I feel like my entire career is just one giant experience of me failing up constantly. I think a lot of it is just 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So there's I think there is failure that, I think the way this question is phrased, it's failure on a macro basis, but really there's daily failures on a micro basis that we're just not sharing. So it's just like, yeah, I fail every day at something. I just don't know what it's going to be or when it's going to be, and just take failure with grace and go along with it.
Yeah, I'll say I have a memorable experience of failing, although I do very much relate to the daily failures mood. So thanks for bringing that phrase into my life. So I said that I moved from MTV to the media startup world, and it sounds like, oh yeah, I made this like cognizant decision. But what happened is that my contract didn't get picked up. So MTV is one of the many legacy media companies, or at least they were at the time, that was basically making all of their full-time staff members have really short contracts. So I was on a 3-month contract for the time that I was there, which meant every 3 months I might just like not have a job anymore. And at first that was fine because, you know, things were going well. And then they did a lot of like restructuring in their digital department. And some of that restructuring was kind of cutting off some of the newer employees. So for me, I had been in my full-time position there for 9 months. And at the end of my third 3-month contract, they were like, yeah, we're not picking this up anymore. But, you know, it's a 3-month contract. They didn't have to fire me, any of that. And so then I was in a position where all of a sudden I just didn't have a job. I was moving the week after my job officially ended, and I had no prospects, but I had been networking my butt off and writing a bunch of free stuff for Stareable. And they wanted to bring me on because I was doing a lot of work with them. And I really loved community managing in the web series community, but they were a startup. And they were early stage, and they also couldn't make payroll at the beginning, and they certainly couldn't support hiring a new person. And so I had to do a lot of like hustling that summer. I had to do a lot of freelance, like I used to do voiceover for YouTube channels. I would write scripts and record voiceover for trivia YouTube channels, like the 10 craziest sea creatures. And I just got that kind of work through Upwork, and that was sort of what sustained me until Stareable was able to like raise a new round and bring me on full time. But, you know, I made sure to like be very clear with my boundaries with them. Like, hey, if you can't pay me, I can work this amount this week and nothing more. So until you bring me on as a staff member, we are limited. And I think that those boundaries are really important. And, you know, even when you're struggling, working for free 100% just sets the expectation that you're going to continue working for free, and then it makes it hard to know your value. So I learned a lot about boundaries and setting values that summer when I got not laid off, but not picked up by my MTV contract. I'm grateful at how everything turned out, but that was definitely a rough couple of months. And so it taught me how flexible you have to be.
I do want to share a quote that I always think about in this, is that for an arrow to launch, you have to pull back, right? And you have to pull real back. And so I think that that's failing up all the time, is that to launch forward, you have to pull back, and that's going to be the most uncomfortable moments, but that's really what drives. The further you pull back, the further you launch ahead.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing that, because, you know, we always talk about the success and like the shininess of like what we're doing, but there's also stuff behind the scenes, the real struggles that we're all going through as artists and as, you know, creative entrepreneurs or anything in our lives to like push things forward. So thank you for asking that question, Danny. That was super important. And then continuing, you know, talking about, you know, career sustainability. The next question is it possible to have a career that feeds you creatively and financially? And yes or no, based on your experiences. I'd like to start with Zaina, just because I know that you're doing a lot of, you know, independent work as well as working in advertising.
Yeah. Trying to figure out how exactly I want to answer this. So I want to start by saying this, and I will preach this as long as I am breathing. It is okay to have a job outside of being a creative. I think that there's this idea that you have to pick, and you do not. You know, when I was in graduate school, I was an office coordinator, and that was perfect for me because I could sit at my desk and write scripts, do production plans, and use the offices for my production meetings. You know, like there's filmmakers that are Uber drivers. There are filmmakers that work 9-to-5 corporate jobs. I've had a full-time job since I was 16 years old. You know, like you don't have to have a job in a creative industry in order to be a filmmaker. Your job doesn't define you. I always tell filmmakers to look at it as your primary investor in your independent work. And I think about like Ava DuVernay. She had an entire career in entertainment PR before she even became Ava DuVernay. And she also self-funded her films that went on to be award-winning. And that's how she, started to get the connections that she did and became who she was. But I think there's this false notion that if you're not doing it full time, that you're not a real artist. And that is false. And so I just wanted to put that out there that like, you absolutely can have a job in absolutely anything and still be a creative. Majority of people don't know that I'm in commercial production because I don't promote myself as a commercial producer. People know me as a filmmaker. My portfolio, when you go on my website, you see a filmmaker. The ad work is a password protected link just so I can keep up with the shit that's there. But that's not who I am, And I think that it's really important for people to feel okay with that you can have a career that feeds you, that keeps a roof over your head and allows you to comfortably make your art. That's okay. Is it possible to work in the industry and work in a creative industry and sustain yourself? Absolutely. I'm in commercial production, and it's great to be able to connect with directors and reps and production houses and post houses and VFX houses. And that's part of my job. And it also makes me sharper as a independent filmmaker as well. So yeah, it's absolutely possible, but don't look at that as the only way of the only route that you can take.
Who are we going to next?
Feel free to jump in. I mean,
for me, it's definitely a yes. I think I'm a business owner first, and I'm just in the business of creativity. So I think the key word here is as long as you're flexible, yes, you can be in a very lucrative creative career. And that might mean that you don't get to pursue that dream of becoming Martin Scorsese. But and that's obviously very lucrative as well. But I think you are playing a percentage game here. So if you want to be Martin Scorsese, you're probably playing that 0.1% game overall. And your chances of falling into a very lucrative career, just as he has, are very, very low. But that being said, they exist, and it's worth pursuing that as well. But for me, as a business owner, it's like we constantly pivot and shift. Like in the pandemic, we've started to do a lot of different things that we haven't done before. Pre-pandemic, we were constantly pivoting and changing things on a day-to-day basis. So as long as you're flexible, it can be highly lucrative. So you have to just define like, what is it that you really, really want, and what's really important to you? Like, do you want to be a filmmaker in the traditional Hollywood sense, or are you okay writing and directing other projects that don't fall under that traditional umbrella?
Yeah, amen to flexibility. There's a quote that will always stand with me from school, from Rebecca Flashpoint. An instructor once told me, there's going to be a lot of work, but not a lot of jobs. And in that moment, he was preparing us to let us know, like, if you want to be a location audio recordist, there's no full-time jobs for that. It's a constant hustle. And there's a lot of work out there. But you have to hobble it together. And I think certainly for majority of creatives, it is a lot of hobbling. And you have to be able to know how to manage that and how to organize that and how to go get it. And the ones that are still very successful, of my former classmates and colleagues that really did that, hobbled the shit out of stuff. And some of them have now been able to get the full-time work, or to be able to get the success they want, or to become the business owners or whatever. But it's being able to hobble it and know that's going to be the reality, and it's not going to be glamorous. And in our industry, we're starting from the bottom in the most unglamorous of ways. We aren't going after the Bains or the Deloittes or the, Boston, consulting group type stuff. Like a lot of the stuff we're doing, like we're not touching a camera for a lot of years for some of us. And so some of that also, I think, taking the ego out of that, knowing that this is what we've chosen. is key. I think the other thing to realize that like to be a creative, to truly live a full-time creative life is a privilege. And not just in the most like beautiful, oh, it's so good privilege. Like you have to have a level of access and privilege to do this, right? If my husband, for example, didn't have a full-time job at the time that I could lean back on to become an entrepreneur, I wouldn't be here. And I think that's for a lot of us. And Naima could very well be a part of this panel to talk about that as well, that it's a lot of hobbling, it's a lot of everything. You have families as women. We're having families that we also have to take care of. And that's a major consideration when we think about pursuing this kind of work. Because this isn't just about following a passion. And in school, and we're 18, we can think about that. But then you get into your late 20s and your 30s and you have families, and that's no longer a dream that you can hold on to. And so I think that has to sink into the realities that this is a level of privilege to be able to do what we do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think hobbling is a good way to think of it. Like I mentioned, I have 4 jobs right now. I teach at 2 graduate programs. I have a part-time gig now with Hoo Ha Ha, and I have my full-time job at Seed and Spark. And of course, I'm always looking for other things because I want to make sure that if I am the #1 funder of my phone, like Santa says, like I need to have a lot of options because the startup world is not secure. Multiple of you have mentioned how insecure being a startup participant, owner, whatever can be. And that's the same case in creative careers. If I was attempting to be a full-time creator right now, I would have the same level of uncertainty. So for me, the hobbling is what keeps things slightly less uncertain. And I would also say that it's important if you're not working like in an ancillary creative career, although there are way more of those than you might think. The 4 or 5 of us are all examples of that in the various things that we do. But I also think that if you are frustrated with, the lack of creativity at whatever you happen to be doing right now, I think that there's probably something that you can be doing to make that work more creative. I was a barista when I first moved to New York. I worked at a coffee shop. I had the 4 a.m. shift every day to wake up with Tribeca to get all the rich business people to work. But what that job taught me was how to, honestly, I honed my comedy writing skills because I had an interaction of 30 seconds or less with all of these people who I had to get to give me a tip so that I could buy my train ticket home. And that forces you to get very quick with not just selling like the literal products that I'm selling for the company that I don't make any money off of. I'm not getting commission at this coffee shop, but it teaches you to sell yourself as like a personality that they enjoy seeing every morning and will be willing to drop a buck in the bucket for you. And a lot of that was me finding out ways to make all of these various, like very serious people laugh. And that became actually a really strong motivator for me going into, doing crowdfunding pitch videos, like learning how to talk to people and convince them to give me money without saying like, hey, you give me a buck was a valuable skill to learn. And it allowed me to experiment and get silly. And I learned how to make latte art. And now latte art is on my resume, not for any practical reason, but because I think it gives me a fun edge. And I think that that's important to remember as well, is just because you're not in a creative industry doesn't mean you can't be creative at work. And it also doesn't mean that it's not still helping you get further in whatever your eventual imagined career is.
Yeah, I'm hearing all these stories, and I know so many people can relate to this, and also people who are interested in like, what is it going to take for me to pursue this field or different parts of it? What could it look like? And so one of, Bree and Elena, you brought up an interesting point in, different ways of like how you have to start, and then also like thinking about access. And so I'm curious to know for all of you, if, whoever can kind of jump in, is how are you thinking about equity, diversity and inclusion in the work that you're doing?
I'll take this one first. I think given where we come from, right, because we were working with some of the most disenfranchised populations as we were building I think when I realized the biggest impact I can make is not on the world or on our videos, it's what I can do as a leader in my own workforce. And especially being in the world of HR, I feel as an HR-focused company, I see it as my responsibility to push innovative workforce practices, to do the things that other companies or leaders may not be empowered to do or may not be thinking about. And so I think really early on, I knew that those who were going to be behind the camera was going to be just as important as who was in front of it. And so, I raised my hand a few years ago to say, look, I manifest to become an employer of choice for women of color. And I put them first. And that does not mean that we don't hire other folks. What that means that if we can put some of the most marginalized in our strategy first, everyone wins in terms of how we really help to, I think, emphasize belonging. And so that, has just really become something that we've just instilled in kind of how we hire and in all parts. I mean, literally from the access of, we a lot of times really don't look at resumes. We have hands-on skill assessments for a reason. We show our jobs on video. Like there's a lot of things in our process that we have changed and just because of where we've come from and what we do. And then certainly look, Naima is a major leader in this, Mesla Media Collective here in Chicago. We've grown to now almost like 600 community members. And it really came from this, initially for me, this idea of wanting to build a talent community is someone who was hiring and someone who really wanted to prioritize women of color. And it's obviously certainly become so much more than that. But it's along the lines of if you cannot see the community, be the community. And I think as film companies, as media companies, we as much are employers as we are creatives. And how dare we tell stories of diverse peoples and communities without being diverse ourselves? How dare we? And so I see that as our responsibility. It's a table stakes for sure. And quite frankly, folks that are going to be hiring you are very much starting to pay attention to that. And so people that didn't pay attention to that before are now starting to look at your team makeup and seeing whether or not they can trust you with the stories that they're asking you to tell.
Absolutely. And Akib, I think as a business owner and entrepreneur, would love to hear how you go about thinking about these same things that Elena is talking about running her business.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my own personal experience, a name like Akib Usman is probably the least common name that you've ever seen. And I think early on in my career, I had a lot of difficulty, like just trying to get my foot into the door where other people would find it to be relatively easy, And I think that there's certainly a lot of like disinclusion, if that's even a word, that's occurred because of it. But to me, it's always been about like, okay, well, let's not make name a factor. Let's not make color a factor. Let's not make race, gender, any of this a factor. And let's go with the work. Put your best foot forward and constantly try to come up with the most creative work or try to set yourself apart in your niche as much as possible. And that's the exact same thing that we do here as well. Like, I don't care what your name is. I don't care who you're related to. Let me see the work first, and then we can have a conversation. And because of this, we've had a tremendous amount of luck from just a whole different diaspora of the world that is non-traditional, that wouldn't get into different places, but because we looked at their work first and we didn't ask any other questions, that helped both them and us, So it's been a key driving factor, certainly.
If I could add, for me, it's a very interesting time to have this like dual life as a commercial producer and also an independent filmmaker, because as an independent filmmaker, like the majority of the work that I do surrounds merging arts and activism. And it's normal for me to have a film set with an entire Black cast and crew. It's normal for me to have women DPs. It's normally for me to have queer folk on my film set. This is normal. Whereas on the commercial film space, it's actually very common for me to be one of the only Black people in a room, the only Black woman in a space. Like that's the norm. And so now there's this huge push for diversity and inclusion, and everybody's like, oh my God. And it's really interesting having conversations, with reps, with director reps that'll reach out and, hey, are you working on any projects? And my response being, yeah, send me a list of your BIPOC directors, and getting either radio silence or a very long email about how they are figuring out how to be more inclusive in their practices. And people are scrambling to find, well, where do we find the Black directors? Where do we find, the Black and brown talent? And it's like, well, I've been working with, we're here and we're available, and they're not actually difficult to find. So I think what's been the most interesting thing, especially this year, is having conversations in the commercial space, whether it be with my department or with reps or with production companies, about what they're doing to be more inclusive and how this is not anything that's difficult. It's not anything that takes an initiative or 30 surveys to figure out. The work is there, the talent is there. It's just about bringing them into the space and giving them opportunities, because there's so much gatekeeping that happens in the industry out of fear, out of, oh, they don't have experience. And a lot of that comes from the advertising industry being a very white male dominated space. It's a dinosaur industry, and people act like you need an Emmy to direct a hand model, you know, holding a bar of soap. And it's like, we need to change that. We need to rethink how we are, our advertising practices. We need to rethink, you know, our teams. We need to rethink how we are being diverse and inclusive in the production space. And I think specifically commercial production can change that very quickly, very, very quickly. So I've been talking to a lot of producers in the space about, you know, even production audits and seeing the demographics of the crews on set, and, you know, like who do we need to bring on more of? And here's, you know, circulating a list of Black directors that are represented, you know, by commercial director or by commercial reps, things like that. And again, it's been really great having these conversations. I think they're long overdue. And I also just think it's just funny, because I feel like I truly am living a double life. Like, what I do as an independent filmmaker, like, this is the norm. And then what's on the commercial film side, everyone's like freaking out about it. It's what a time. Very interesting time.
Yeah. I mean, when we're thinking about, you know, the time that we're in right now, the other big kind of elephant in the room is COVID. I mean, there's a reason why we're behind screens right now, right? And so we have a question from Arden Crawford, who asked, I would love to hear any insight from the panelists about tips they have for people about to graduate college, entering the industry in the time of COVID. Feel free to jump in. Anyone can kind of take this question.
I think that, you know, one of the things that this has been mentioned earlier on this conversation too, but the sale, when you're graduating, you're not taught anything about sales. And I feel like sales really has this, it's tainted. Like, nobody wants to be that salesperson, because it's just like, ugh, I don't want to be that slimy salesperson. I don't want to be too salesy. But the reality is that I think we need to change how sales is really thought about. And sales is really about solving problems and identifying problems and providing solutions to them, to someone who can afford to solve them. So when it comes to, like, what tips do you have about people, for people who can graduate, you know, or people about to graduate? I think it's like, identify an organization or a person and really figure out what challenges that they're going to have at their job. And especially during COVID, like, I think this is an amazing opportunity for people that are graduating right now to really be creative, because this is where things are being shaken up. This is where mass layoffs are happening. This is where every organization needs to think about how they can be more creative, how they can solve a problem in a different way. And I think right now is the time that any idea is welcome. Like, I'm 100% all ears. You have any sort of idea that you can help me with at my business, at my work, I'm all ears. Like, I'm totally listening. And I think everybody's like that. Everybody's trying to figure out what's next, what's new, what's different, what can we do to set ourselves apart from our competition, what can we do to make our existing business practices better. And the reality is that everybody right now is taking a hit, and everybody's like, I'm willing to double down on ideas that have potential. So if you have any sort of great idea, I know it sounds vague, great idea, but it's about, like, really identifying an organization and people and trying to think about yourself in that person's shoes and saying, like, I think that they might find this valuable, and offering it up to them. And LinkedIn is generally your best resource. LinkedIn has helped us tremendously as far as my business is concerned.
One of the things that I wish more recent graduates or students about to graduate, we're told is this is specifically for filmmakers, to write scripts according to the resources you have available to you. That is the quickest way for you to differentiate yourself from somebody who is talking about making films and someone who's actually making films. I'm not going to write a script that has 17 locations, a Jaguar, a helicopter chase, and an ensemble cast in it. You know, like, I don't have access to those things. What I do have access to are my classmates who might be DPs, editors, gaffers. I have an apartment that we can film in. You know, everyone knows actors, you know, right? What is the most amazing thing that you can create in one room with 3 characters? You know, like, the industry, they don't want to hear you talk about, you know, the work that you want to do. They want to see a link. Rarely ever in the industry that from what I hear from people in the industry, especially, is that they don't like, resumes are like, no one wants to read about what you do. They want to click a link and they want to see what you've done. They want to see how you've utilized the resources that you've had with those limitations, especially now in COVID, where the norm is for, okay, we can only have 10 people on set. You know, we can only have a certain amount of people here. So these are the limitations. What can you do with those limitations? And I think that having me being able to graduate with a body of work of those micro budget independent films that were done in film school or right after film school is what got noticed by the ad industry. And I think that if more students were told, you know, to build your portfolio so that you are looked at as an asset to organizations and companies, as opposed to going to these organizations and asking them for opportunities, you know, being able to give yourself those opportunities with the resources that you have available to you is a really great place to start. So I would, if you're a writer, I would be writing scripts according to the resources you have available to you. If you're a producer, I would be getting with writers. This is the time. Everyone's at home, you know, connect like hell, network virtually online like crazy. You should be having a coffee meeting every single day with a filmmaker. You should be growing your network ridiculously. We're in the crib. We're all like, no one's going anywhere. Like, this is not, and it's crazy because it's like, oh, we didn't have time to meet up. It's like, if you don't hop on this Zoom call real quick and just say hi, you know, I've connected with filmmakers in Canada. I've connected with filmmakers in South Africa. Like, this time of COVID has connected me to filmmakers globally. And again, focusing on what you have available to you and growing your network, I think is a really great place to start. And it's okay to just have a job while you're doing it. That job doesn't have to be in the industry. Get your bills paid, connect and network with as many filmmakers as you can, and write scripts that you can shoot tomorrow if you wanted to. Steps off of soapbox.
You know, just to add on to that, I think the first question that we ask people when they come in for an interview is, okay, let me see your work. And I mean, obviously we're screening people before they even get in there, but we want people to be able to present their work as well and not just like have it, you know, because I want to understand like what problems you had while you were making the project and really understand your psyche and logic behind making these decisions. That's super, super key. So 100%, you need a strong body of work.
Yeah, and you're kind of in the unique position of, you know, your situation of being, you know, a student or about to be like a recent grad and not having a lot of money and not having the ability to have like a full-throated film crew around you is like the actual reality of what most full-throated film crews are going through. And they now have to relearn that, but you have that experience right now. So embrace your restrictions and make something amazing within them. Like, there's a way to make an apartment, you know, 3-character scene still look beautiful if you try things out and experiment. Maybe head to a local park. It's safer to shoot outdoors anyways. And just going outside wherever that could be for you adds a lot of production value because people don't expect you to go outside of the apartment. Like, think about all of the unique things that you have access to that no one else does, whether that's your particular location, whether it's a random skill set of a friend of yours. Again, I made a zombie web series because a girl in my graduating class had taught herself to do zombie makeup. I couldn't hire out for that, but she had that skill. And we were like, well, then let's put that to use. Let's make something really cool that not everyone is going to be able to do. So like, what are the unique skill sets of you and the people around you that you love working with? And how can you use your limitations to be as creative as possible and show people that you can be tenacious and ambitious, even with absolutely nothing to your name?
Amen to all of that. Next.
Well, we're actually cutting a little over or going a little over on our time, but I wanted to, ask this one more question from the audience that I think is important, and maybe it's something especially Elena and Akib can really talk to as, business owners. What this question comes from Alex, and his question is, what about people who have learning disabilities? Should they be open to letting the person who is interviewing know that you have a learning disability, or should they not bring it up?
I've actually run into this problem a few times. Like, this situation has happened to me, and we've hired regardless. In some cases, it's been upfront, and in some cases, it's been like later down the line. But like I said, we've hired regardless. And again, it's like about the portfolio and about the work and about who you present yourself to be. I think learning disabilities, I honestly hadn't experienced it until like it started to come to our door, and people that we were interviewing had learning disabilities, but we still did it regardless, and it worked out in our favor, and we really liked the people that we worked with and still do. So it's hard to say. I think it's rather than forcing it into the conversation, let it come up naturally, and allow your work to speak for itself.
Hey, Alex, please connect with me on LinkedIn and I'll tell you why. HR, there's a lot of legalities to this, and companies are working really differently, and I can understand your hesitation. And so there's some legal stuff to this that makes that really challenging either way. So I don't want to misspeak due to just like HR laws and things that both protect you, right? So please connect with me and I can very much get you the right answers.
Yeah, listen to her more than you listen to me.
Not to say, I think the difference is, right, we're small businesses, and so we are much more malleable than working at large enterprises where there's a lot of other stuff here. So I think depending on where you're applying, it's going to be met differently. And I think it's just to protect you. I want to be able to provide you with the best answers, and my entire connections are all HR people. And so I will very much be asking this question to all of them to get you the best answer.
Thank you for your question, Alex, and for other people who submitted questions, and apologies we couldn't get to all of them. But, one thing I have found being in the Midwest, and particularly in the Chicago area, is how giving and friendly we all are, or you all are, because I'm not originally from the Midwest. But when I came here and saw how everyone's willing to talk and connect, like, that is the difference for me in other places that I've lived in, where I come from. And so really appreciate all the panelists we've had today, and, sharing their insight and their personal experiences. And we hope that, people realize too that there is stuff here, that to work on. You don't have to be where you don't want to be, and geographically. If you would like to stay in Illinois and in the Midwest and make work, there are people like Elena and Zaina and Akib who are here and are creating and doing everything. So Zaina, did you have one last thing you'd like to add? Or I saw, oh, okay. It
No.
looks like Mike went off. So thank you all for participating today. Thank you for allowing me to kind of moderate this conversation. And it was great speaking to you all, and thank you all for tuning in. If you have any last things you'd like to say, feel free. Otherwise, we can wrap up and have everyone reach out to you separately.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for bringing us all together. And yeah, definitely for those of you who asked questions that we didn't have time for because we had so much else to say, please feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions, especially about crowdfunding. If you're looking to get a lot of people who are excited about what you're working on to give you a little bit each to build your budget.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.